Good evening, everybody. Glad to see we're all sitting in the back. I love it. That makes me feel very welcome. That's really good. No, I do appreciate that this time to be able to speak with you and be able to speak without a mask on. I don't get to do this at work, and talking to my kids up close, it's just not the same as kind of yelling toward you all. So I do appreciate this opportunity. I spoke with Tom about how this experience went last week because I wasn't able to be here, and he said, don't expect anyone to ask any questions. So if anyone is just feeling compelled to yell through their mask, go ahead and do it. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Looking here at Proverbs 3 and 4, at first glance, if you didn't happen to read these things, they're familiar passages that you're going to see. There's some things that you may have memorized many years ago that once you hear a word or two, it's going to pop back into your memory, especially in Proverbs 3. I have a feeling that we may not be able to get through everything, and if we do get through everything, I don't think we'll be able to do justice to these chapters. So on the only slide that I have, provided an outline here of both chapters. So if you're able to see whether you're in the middle or toward the back, if you would like to look at these things later and kind of look at these outlines, hopefully this will be a helpful way for you to kind of go through and organize the thoughts. Again, I looked at several commentaries. I've read through this several times trying to find a good way to look at it, a good way to study, knowing that you all may not be able to really say much to me, if anything at all. Hopefully we can get something out of this together. Okay, so the plan for tonight would be kind of to take these section by section, kind of walk through the different pieces here on the outlines, hit a few of the kind of highlights that I hope will be valuable to you as you go through the rest of the week, and hopefully we can get done in reasonable time. It looks like I have plenty of time here, so I don't think we're going to have to be rushed. But let's begin here looking at Proverbs 3. The first here, this kind of outline piece of commitment to God, would be chapter 3 in the first 10 verses. So we'll read through those, and if you have a Bible handy, go ahead and take it out. It will be helpful for you. So it starts out here saying, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, so that you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with your first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine." So here, this idea of commitment to God really kind of stood out to me. Hopefully you can see where that is coming from. And there's a lot of words of encouragement here, a lot of mention of being steadfast, a lot of mention of commandments, meaning that we have to be aware of what God is demanding of us, and that we are called upon to stay close to these things. And this is really clear in verse number 3. Again, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Now, normally this is where I would say, what do you think about that? But I know that's not going to work this time. Unless Roger wants to scream something out, I don't think we're going to get a lot of feedback here. But looking at this, it's this idea that you never forget commandments of God. And maybe you're as forgetful as I am. I write a lot of notes. Sometimes I forget where I put the notes that I write myself. I don't know if anyone else has ever done that. Maybe it's a college professor thing. Maybe it's just a me thing. I don't know. But sometimes I take notes so I won't forget this. I make notes to myself. I try to put it on my phone. I try to write it and leave it on the kitchen table so I don't forget it. And sometimes, Kurt, I just forget it anyway. These things happen. But the idea is that if we're putting those notes in front of our face, it's a constant reminder that we shouldn't lose sight of it. That if we're going to, again, write these on the tablet of your heart, your mind, it's always going to be something that's present, that we should not forget these things. But in order for us to be taking these notes, in order to remind ourselves of what we should be doing, it's also implied here that we need to know what those commandments are in the first place. And that's going to become clear as we get even into chapter 4. Well, how do we learn these things to begin with? So it's important here that if we're going to have a true commitment to God, that we have to be, number one, aware of the commandments, be aware of what is required of us, and then number two, make an effort to not forget those things. It is really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day kinds of things that we have. Again, in this time, and everyone talking about a pandemic, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety that's going on. It's very easy to get focused on just those things and lose sight of what's really important. And if we're honest with ourselves, we probably have all done that. And it's not an easy thing to stay focused. So we have to make an effort here to, again, bind them around your neck. You're not going to forget it if it's on your person. Just write that on the tablet of your heart. Think of it as writing those notes to yourself that I will not forget this. I will stay focused on these things, and then my commitment is to God more than anything else. So that was point number one. Another verse that I thought would be worthwhile for you all would be verse number 6. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. And again, there's this kind of implication that we have to submit to God's will, that we all make plans, that we all think that we can figure things out. And again, that's not always an easy thing to say, well, I guess I don't have control here. But that's exactly what we're being told we should do, right? The idea is acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. Not acknowledge him and you will figure it out because you have all the answers inside. There are plenty of self-help books out there. There are plenty of even folks that claim to be gospel ministers that will say, do these things and life will be great, right? Say this prayer and wealth is coming your way. Peace and comfort all the days of your life. And that's not really what any of this says, right? That we have to be willing to submit ourselves to a pathway that God creates for us rather than a pathway that we can create for ourselves. That we may have some choices that we have to make, that we still have agency here, but at the same time we have to trust that God knows better than we do. And again, that's not always an easy thing to do, so we have to again go back to the commitment that we're making to God, that we're doing these things because it is what is required of us, that God does not owe us anything, that he does not have to do anything for us, but he will do those things if we are willing to submit to his will and to his commandments. And that feeds into verse number 7. And if one of these jumps out at you, this is probably one of them. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Now again, the theme of wisdom is something that will come up again and again in chapters 3 and 4. So if you're looking for kind of buzzwords when you study, that's definitely going to be one of them. This idea, be not wise in your own eyes. And I have to say, I work with a lot of people that have a lot of formal education. They have a lot of pieces of paper up on the wall that say they know a lot of things about a lot of things. Now, you can take that for what it's worth, right? But it's this idea that if we get a little bit too comfortable with our own understanding, that if we think that we can create our own pathway and that we can live life the way that we want to, we're going against everything that I've looked at and kind of pointed out to you so far. Right? Be not wise in your own eyes. Right? If we lean on our own understanding, again, if we think that we have the answers to all of life's problems, we're going to be sorely disappointed. Because the reality is that we simply do not. If we're avoiding the commandments of God, if we're going our own path and kind of trying to choose our own way without any sort of reliance on God, we're going to be lost. And that notion will come up again in chapter 4, talking about what path are you going to choose. Are you going to choose the path of God and goodness, or are you going to go down the road of darkness and wickedness? So again, we still have a choice, but the idea here is that we need to lean on God, lean on His commandments, look to Him for guidance, rather than hoping we can do everything by ourselves. So I know you're not going to say much, but you can give me nonverbals. Does that make sense so far? There, I got head nods, yes. I appreciate those things. This feels like I'm at work. You all have masks on and no one's saying anything. So it feels more comfortable than you know, like it really does. So those are just a few points there. And again, somehow that took 9 minutes, so I think we're right on pace, okay, to get through this. So the second section I'd like you to consider is verses 11 through 20, and kind of building on this idea of making that commitment. Then we have to go the next step and really trust in God and what He has in store for us. So starting in verse 11, it says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of His reproof. For the Lord reproves him whom He loves, as a father the son in whom He delights. Blessed is one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold fast are called blessed. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding He established the heavens. By His knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped down the dew." So verse 11 may be another verse that you have heard many times, maybe something that you've memorized in the past. And I have to say, it's kind of changed in the past few years for me, the way that I read this. And it's weird how life does that to you, that you go from being the son to being the father. And discipline looks a lot different when you're giving it than when you're receiving it. So this is an interesting way to kind of look at this. And this illustration, right, of the father and the son is also something that we're going to see in chapters 3 and 4, where you can take it in the kind of the worldly sense of a father and a son, a parent and a child. We can also be thinking of God and His children, which is us. So this idea here in verse 11, right? Do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of His reproof. That there is, in fact, going to be value in discipline. There is going to be some value, if you take it a step further, in suffering, because we learn from those mistakes and from when we are corrected. So I don't expect my children to understand exactly what's going on. I mean, you've seen them behave and misbehave. They do both, sometimes one more than the other. And they get plenty of discipline, and sometimes it feels like it's not really ringing in their ears at all. And I have a similar relationship at work dealing with students that are somebody's children, but they aren't mine. And they like to think that they're adults because they're 18, and something magical happens when you're 18 and you know everything. It is also amazing how that works. And it's this idea, and I say this to them, whether it's my own kids or kind of my work children. I say, when I stop correcting you, when I stop pushing you to be better, it's because I've given up on you. And there is something to that here, and then that's exactly what we see here. Don't be weary of it, because again in verse 12, the Lord reproves him whom He loves. That God wants the best for us, that He's trying to lead us on the path that we should be on, and sometimes we have to be told to change our behavior. And I doubt anyone here loves to be told that they're wrong. I know that I don't. And it doesn't feel good to be disciplined by people that you care about and being told that you need to change from them. But it's something that we absolutely have to get used to, and there is no magic at 18 where that just goes away, right? All of us in here are still subject to this, that we can still be corrected and reproved, It may be someone sitting in here that's doing that correction. It may be someone in your home that's doing that correction. It may be the words that are coming from this pulpit, right, that are doing the correcting, right? It's something that you feel and you realize, I messed up, that I'm not on the correct pathway and I have to turn things around. Now, a lot of folks will react, especially today, that if they have this feeling that I've got all the answers, I've got it all figured out, that they will hear your complaints and your attempted correction, and they'll say, what do you know? I'm going to continue on the way that I'm going. And again, what we're seeing here is that is the absolute wrong attitude that we should have, especially if we're going to be followers of God, if we're going to be children of God, that as long as we are being corrected, there's still hope. As long as we still have breath, that we can change our behavior, that we can repent from our mistakes, there's still an opportunity for us. And no, in the moment it does not feel good, but we have to trust that God knows better than we do, and we have to lean on His understanding instead of just our own. So that's verse 11. Verse 15, speaking here of wisdom, she is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. And this means a lot when we're thinking who's writing this with Solomon, right? The idea of having wisdom, to have an idea, a clearer view of the big picture, to really understand the path that we should be taking here, recognizing the value of true wisdom. Again, in verse 14, talking about this, having wisdom or for the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and profit better than gold. We spend a lot of time trying to accumulate silver and gold, right? That we're working our jobs, we're trying to create a livelihood, provide for ourselves and our family, giving back to others, right? We need those means. But here it's saying that wisdom is much more important than any number you can have in your bank account. That having this true understanding is going to be more vital to you in the long run than any sort of check that you can write. And something stuck with me, Roger, that you said on Sunday, this idea that it may be easy if someone, to get money from them. This idea that, if you need money, someone is willing to write a check. They may not be willing to give their time. They may not be willing to give of their talents the way that they should. And it's probably easier in the long run for us to accumulate silver and gold. It's easier for us to go to work and again, build up our bank accounts here. But if we don't have true wisdom, if we don't have an understanding in the way we are supposed to live our life, that money means nothing. Now here's something you can say. If you all say it in unison, I might be able to understand it. Can you take it with you when you die? Can you take the money with you? It's when you go, no. Really? No one. Okay. So if you wondered, you can't take it with you, and that these things only have temporary value. And that's not to say that none of us need time if that is the only thing that matters. If that is your priority, that is your compass in life, you're missing out on so much. And that's exactly what we're reading here. More precious than jewels, silver, gold. Money's great. Wisdom is greater. Understanding what God has in store for us, the plan that He has for us, the pathway that we should be on, more important than anything you can touch and feel in your hands on this earth. That's number 2. Point number 3 here in verse 19, the heavens. We need to kind of sit back and recognize the power of God's wisdom. And it could be simply looking at the natural elements, kind of looking here what we see in verses 19 and 20, right, talking about the heavens and the earth, right, the creation that is in front of our eyes, things that we take for granted, things that we don't think much about, how much wisdom and understanding that took for that creation. And the same creator that made the complex systems we live in also made us. And again, we have to try to put ourselves in that position where God is superior to us. That you can have all the degrees up on your wall that you want, but God is superior. his understanding is going to be far beyond anything we can truly comprehend. And we have to acknowledge that God understands more than we ever can, and that we have to trust in that knowledge and in that wisdom. Does that make sense? I like it. A few of you are going along. I appreciate that. I really do. Thank you, Kathy. So part 3 here. Walking with God. So if we're going to make that commitment and say, yes, we understand these are the requirements that God has for us, that we need to trust that his wisdom is greater than ours, but we can hope to have some of that wisdom imparted on us if we are behaving the way that we should and following the commandments as we should. And this puts us on a pathway to walk with God. So if you start with me in verse 21 through the end of the chapter. My son, do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, and they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. If you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror or of the ruin of the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again, tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason when he has done you no harm. Do not envy a man of violence, and do not choose any of his ways, for the devious person is an abomination to the Lord, but the upright are in his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. Toward the scorners he is scornful, to the humble he gives favor. The wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace. So in verse 21, this idea, my son, do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. And what we kind of see implied here is that once we obtain wisdom, we also have the ability to lose it. And you can think about this with the idea of being a Christian and having, right, your ticket punched to heaven. It's yours to lose. And we see that same kind of mentality here, that you need to hold fast to it, because if you lose sight of it, then it can be gone. And the life of Solomon, sadly, kind of demonstrates this, that someone that had more wisdom than almost anyone would find himself falling away from that path. That this is a situation where he should have taken his own advice. And that's a good example for us to not repeat those mistakes. That we cannot lose sight of these things. Keep wisdom and discretion. We should be thinking about this, and we cannot take wisdom for granted. We cannot assume that, think of it this way, we cannot assume that if we fill a pew every week, that we look at our Bible every once in a while, that everything is just going to work out. That if we are not going to put in the effort, if we're not going to truly study, if we're not going to make a commitment and trust in God, that wisdom, that understanding can fade away. It can fall through our fingers, and we may not even realize that it's gone. So that we have to actually walk with God. It's not something that is once and forever. It is something that we are continually doing. If we're talking about a walk, it is movement. It is going somewhere. It is not holding still. That if we choose to hold still and we stop walking with God, then we are going to lose this gift of wisdom. Verse 26. Why is it worth it to do this? Verse 26, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. That there is peace, there is security in God's protection. That if we are walking with God, that if we are trusting in Him, if we are committing ourselves to this life, then we have that peace and security that otherwise we wouldn't have. The idea that we can sleep soundly in verse 24. That idea that you can lay down your head at night and know that you're secure. And that's not always the way that we maybe live our lives, that we may do things and make choices and don't really feel like we're on that same walk anymore, that we may not have that same connection. So again, this idea that we don't have to necessarily live our lives fearing the next thing that may happen, because we know ultimately we are on a walk with God, that in the end our fate is secured. And then verse 27 starts to move things in a slightly different direction. And we see here kind of 27 to the end of Proverbs 3 is kind of this general notion of being a good neighbor. And again, this kind of notion of being a good neighbor is going to come back again and again. This is going to be a consistent theme, especially once we get into the New Testament. Right? This idea of being a good neighbor, that the behaviors that we should have to again, not take advantage of someone else's trust, not to be envious, not to basically start fights with people for no reason. Right? This is an application of everything prior in the chapter, saying that if you have true wisdom, this is the way that you should be living your life. These are the types of behaviors you should have. And then we see at the back end of the chapter kind of the contrast, right? Don't do this. Right? Here are the things you should do. Here are the things you should avoid. And we have to admire the clarity here. Because in many things, there's this idea that morality and ethics and behavior, especially from the secular point of view, can be very unclear. It can be ambiguous. You can kind of choose your own way, that what is good is kind of up to your point of view. And here we see it's very clear what you should and should not do. And these are the kinds of things that you should avoid. And if you're doing these things, if you're being envious, if you are a brawler, if you're taking advantage of people's trust, then you're not really following the path walking with God. That you're not demonstrating that you're trusting or committing yourself to God from this point of view. And again, something that's going to be preached from this pulpit, again, we can be here, we can sing the songs, we can say the prayers, but if we walk out of the door and we just act like everybody else, then what exactly was the point of being here in the first place? If we're going to do the things that are laid out for us, they're saying clearly, you should not do these things, and we do it anyway, how can we look at ourselves and say, yes, I'm committed to this walk. Yes, I'm trusting in the wisdom of God, and He's imparting that wisdom on me, if we know better, but behave in a very contrary manner. So again, there are a lot of difficult portions of Scripture. I don't think this counts as one of them. This is very straightforward, and it's there for us to have a very clear example of how we should behave, because again, if we choose to ignore it, that wisdom, that security that we think that we have can easily slip away. Okay. Any questions, comments that you just want to shout at the top of your lungs? Okay, if you want to say anything afterward, I'm sure you can find me and tell me all the things that I did wrong. I'd be happy to hear it. Let's move on to chapter 4. I think we're going to make it in time. So here again, the sections are kind of broken up into three categories. I think it's easier when you just have groups of three. Folks tend to remember groups of three for whatever reason. So hopefully this is easy for you all to kind of outline as well. Let's look at the first 9 verses here in chapter 4. So it says, "Hear, O sons of fathers' instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland, and she will bestow on you a beautiful crown." So again, this kind of likening, this personification of wisdom that we see in chapter 3 is going to carry over into chapter 4, kind of referring to, again, to help us recognize what wisdom would be if it was a tangible thing that we could touch and feel, right? This idea that you need to, again, hold close, to embrace, and the benefits of holding on to wisdom. And going back here to verse 5, right, this idea of get wisdom, get insight, do not forget, and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. And again, this takes on a very different point of view, and this idea of parental guidance. It is different when you are the one being given the advice and when you're the one giving the advice. And it really is, right? It can take an entirely different meaning once you do this, so I'm thankful that I've been able to kind of live through that and be able to experience it. Do not forget. And this is something, again, that I do with especially Owen. If you've noticed, he's a little ornery, and I imagine Laura's smiling behind the mask. He really is. He has a great memory when he wants to. He doesn't always want to remember things where he would get in trouble, right? This idea of wisdom, and there are the things you should do and the things you shouldn't do, and the idea is do not forget these things. Again, write the notes down. Keep it around your neck. Do not forget these things, because it is the most important thing that you can have is wisdom. The most important thing you can do is know the commandments of God, make a commitment to them, trust in them, walk in that path, right? It's building on the ideas from chapter 3 here. Do not forget them and do not turn away from them. And this can be a challenge, too, that you can lead, again, the idea you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Again, simple things are sometimes the most informative. This is one of those things. That you can speak, and you can speak, and you can speak, right? That you can tell your coworkers, you can tell your friends, you can tell your children, and it may not be that they forget it, but they're choosing not to listen to you. And I'm sure that everyone in this room has had an experience where they've tried to talk to someone that they cared about deeply and tried to get them to listen, to try to show them the words in this book, to try to help them, to try to do anything they could. And maybe someone listened to them. Maybe they made the step to even come with them to services, maybe get baptized, and then somewhere along the way, they're no longer here. That maybe they listened to it, they didn't forget it, they just chose to walk in a different path. And it's a heartbreaking feeling when that happens. To be rejected with the words here where you're trying to help someone to see this, and they choose to either ignore it or to just simply turn away. And again, I imagine that is a common experience in here. And unfortunately, that is something that we're going to run into. But we need to, again, for us, we can't turn away from it. We can't forget these things. And again, that idea, we see it again in verse 6 here, do not forsake her, talking about wisdom, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. That we have to hold on to these things as well. It's great to say, well, those people, they need to listen. Those people need to remember, and they need to stay on the straight and narrow. This also applies to us. That we can't help anyone else onto that straight and narrow path if we ourselves are not on the straight and narrow path. That if we ourselves are lacking wisdom because we've chosen to ignore something, to turn away from something, because we wanted life to be a little bit more convenient, we wanted to continue living the way that we felt good about, even if it's contrary to the commandments that were given, if it's contrary to the Scripture. So this is something that we really have to recognize here, to resolve to follow the example of the Father. And it's important to be obedient to our parents. That is not something mentioned just one time, and it's repeated for a reason, so that we don't forget and don't turn away. And not just for our fathers and mothers here on earth, but we need to be thinking of God our Father, that we need to resolve, we need to make that decision that we're going to follow that example. And it's not always easy. It's not going to be comfort and joy and wealth for the rest of your life, no matter anyone who says that they are a gospel preacher claims. It's just not the way it is, and you know that. You have to go in with your eyes wide open, make a commitment. Another one of these easy things. If it was easy, everybody would do it. This is something that if you're going to make a commitment, you have to put in the work. It is not something that you can just have happen to you. It's something that you have to work for. That's what we see here. So follow parental guidance. Follow that example. Choosing a path. If we're going to be looking at this guidance, what are our choices? Again, we still have agency. We have free will. What kind of path will we choose? So starting in verse 10. It says, "Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on, for they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble." So as we see here in verse 11, right, this idea of the paths of uprightness, that straight path, keeping your eye on the prize, keeping your eye on the ball, whatever you want to use to remember it, that's what we're doing here. That you need to remain focused on the path. And again, the idea here, Solomon is saying, I'm giving you all the information you need. But in the end, it is up for you to choose which path you're going to go down. So again, this idea, steer clear of the ways of evil in verse 15. Again, if you're looking for very clear descriptions of what to do or not to do, this is another great one. There is no confusion here. This is not ambiguous. It reads again, avoid it, do not go on it, turn away from it, and pass on. So if that is not making sense to you, read it over and over until it does. That this is not an option for you. You cannot kind of go down that path and come back. If you're going down, right, if you're making a decision and you're going down a path, this is not the one you even look at. This is the one that you steer clear from. This is the one that you avoid at all costs, because taking a step on this path is leading you to a step away from God, leading to a step of eternity in damnation. This is not something that is confusing. This is not something that is, again, going to be vague, and sometimes we need that. And this is one that jumped out to me right away. And again, if you would look at this and look at different commentaries, they would say much the same thing, that this is there to catch your attention and to make sure you understand, again, the gravity of this situation. That we can't tiptoe in evil and then come back and claim to be righteous. There are two paths that we can choose. So the way of wisdom is the straight path. We need to steer clear of the ways of evil. And again, this illustration of the path that we need to be on in light. You can see where you're walking. It's very obvious where you're going. And hopefully, right, you won't stumble. This idea of that if you can see where you are walking, it is easier to walk that path. Whereas the alternative is going to be a pathway of darkness. Right? You're again groping in the dark with your eyes closed. You don't really know where you're going. You just know that you're moving somewhere. You're not really going to get where you need to go. You're going to be lost in more ways than one. So again, this kind of comparison between light and darkness, this clarity that we would see in verses like verse 15, this is there for our instruction. So there, if you're wondering, well, why are we looking at the Old Testament? Again, for reproof and instruction, right? The examples are here for a reason. They serve a purpose, and this is one of those times. So choose a path. Make a decision. Are you going to be in the light, or are you going to be in the darkness? And once you are making that decision, be prepared for the consequences, both good or negative. And then last here, the hope is that you choose the pathway of light. I think all of us in here would say, that sounds like the better choice. that is the one that I want to choose. But again, this is going to be a walk. It is a pathway that you have to go down. It is not something to say, I did it, I'm saved, we're done. This is going to be a walk until the very end. So to finish here with chapter 4, starting in verse 20. My son, be attentive to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those that find them, and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. So again, verses 25 through 27, very straightforward, right? That you have to be thinking, which way am I going to go? And I need to be looking to the end. I need to follow that straight path. And that is something that can be challenging to do, right? And something, maybe those of you that mow your own lawn with a push mower, right? The worst thing you can do if you want uneven lines is to be looking down right in front of you. The idea is you need to find a vantage point at the end of your yard. You need to go straight to that vantage point so you can have a nice straight line. I doubt anyone here is plowing fields, so I thought mowers would be a little bit clearer. The idea that you want those nice straight lines and you're looking ahead, you're not looking straight down. But it's a lot easier to see that vantage point when it's light than when it's dark. That you have to fix your eyes on that and you have to be walking towards that path. If you start to veer, there go your straight lines, you're out of luck. That's not the way this is going to work. That if we're going to swerve to the left or the right, then we're not going to accomplish the goal we set out to accomplish. So you really need to be thinking, what path am I going on? What are the steps that I'm going to take? And I need to keep my eyes fixed on that goal, because that's the most important place we can be. Not a straight line in the yard, but we have to see heaven in that vantage point. We have to be kind of blocking out all of the things around us that may obscure our sight. So seek the path of light. Seek the path of wisdom so that we can commit, trust, and walk with God. Are there any questions or comments that you'd like to make now? I know, again, this is not an easy venue for that. So that is all that I had. I have 7:48. I think that's a good time to kind of sit back and reflect on these things. Hopefully there was something that you pulled out of this that can be helpful to you, something that's encouraging to you to kind of keep your eyes on that goal, especially in a world right now that seems like everything is crazy. We have to keep our eyes fixed on where we're going, and we have to really think about the pathway of our feet. So if there's anyone here that needs to take the time now, I don't think there are, but if there are that haven't been baptized, now I guess we have the baptistry is not functional, but I'm sure we can figure something out, Roger, is that correct? We could. And if anyone needs the prayers of the congregation, if you're struggling with something and you really need the prayers of the congregation, you really need prayer to try to help you to get your feet back on the right path, and you want to come forward and make those concerns known, now is the time. If we can help you in any way, please come. We stand and sing.